what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you lots and lots of different techniques that you can achieve using solid watercolour sticks.
The rendering process with coloured pencils is very similar to that of graphite and charcoal. The basic elements for laying down colour are strokes. The difference happens in how you apply those marks and the shape and the length of them. Here I'm applying short strokes using a number of different colours to create texture and also to cover the surface. The strokes could be even shorter than this, i.e. a series of dots in a pointillist style. We're not actually mixing colours here, we're merely laying one colour against another. So that what's happening, we're getting optical mixing of the colour in a similar manner to the way the Impressionists would have painted. If I create another rectangle now, I can show you another type of shading or way of applying colour to the surface of the paper. This method uses long strokes, or as it is known, hatching and cross-hatching. As we do this, we can gradually increase the saturation of the colour on the surface of the paper. All we're basically doing here is gradually eliminating the white of the paper so that everything subsequently appears to be a lot darker. I'm also using changes of pressure as well, so by increasing the pressure I can darken the pigment even further. What I'm doing now is to show you a burnishing technique. I start by laying down dark colours onto the surface of the paper. Over this I work in a layer of pale colour, in this instance white. The white also acts as a blender, pushing the pigment around and completely saturating the surface of the paper. The end result is a very smooth finish with a slightly waxy feel. You can use any colour to burnish, but get greater impact the greater the tonal difference between the two colours. Here I'm applying some strong layers of colour that I can then remove at the edges with different types of eraser. Firstly, an electric eraser, which is quite aggressive and will remove the surface of the paper, but great for retrieving highlights. Second, this is a vinyl rubber, slightly less aggressive but still very effective for removing the pigment. I'm now going to produce a couple of triads of colour using a red, blue and indigo pencil to show you two different ways of wetting the surface. The first method is the obvious one, using water. You can see that the pigment readily goes into solution and can be controlled and pushed around on the surface. Using these three colours, nearly all the pigment lifts off the surface. Another way we can do this is to use a solvent such as turpentine or odorless thinners. In this instance I'm using Tim Fisher's pastel liquefier. You can see that the pigment lifts less easily and is more sluggish when you move it around. What I'm doing here is applying a puddle of water onto the surface of the paper. Watercolour pencils are one of the few instruments that you can use virtually underwater. The paper is absolutely soaking, but if I hold the pencil pressed to the surface of the paper, I can actually draw through that puddle of liquid and create an image on the surface. You'll notice that as I lift the pencil away, as I'm drawing the fence, the surface water picks up the pigment and carries it away. So it's a great technique. This is where watercolour pencils really come into their own. If you're out of doors sketching in the pouring rain, you stand a chance of getting a half decent sketch down with a watercolour pencil, which is something you can't do with any other medium. Now we're on trees, I'll show you some different methods of representing distance. We've just done a tree close up, with strong representative colour and detail. As we look at trees in the middle distance, we change the colour to a mauvey grey to give recession. We also add less detail, so I've just indicated a few branches and blocked in the canopy. Now for trees even further away, we can just do some simple vertical strokes. We also have the option of softening these back with the brush pen. There, that's a few different ways of representing trees. What I'm using now is another technique where I dip the pencil into a glass of water before applying it to the dry surface of the paper. This helps to augment the colour release of the stick. You can see that we're getting some lovely rich strong colours and it's all running into each other. Quite a nice way of working this. The other thing you'll notice is that as you go into a wet area, the sharp tip also creates some light branches as well. Now skies can create a bit of a problem when working with watercolour pencils, because if you scribble the pigment onto the surface and then wet it, you can often leave behind the drawing marks, which can be undesirable in this area. This is a much more gentle way of painting the sky. I've basically shaved off some of the pigment with a scalpel, and I'm now wetting the surface and creating the cloud shapes. Again, a much more controllable way of applying watercolour to create a sky. You just keep moving the brush around to dissolve all the flecks on the surface. I'm going to show you an easy way of painting figures and crowds. I'm taking several different colours and dipping them into a glass of water and making a series of marks on the paper. Amazingly enough, they start to look like people, and if we add a few heads and feet and shadows, the crowd miraculously appears. We don't have to match legs to heads. I just let my mind tell me which ones look like figure shapes. Another way that we can paint figures is by using the brush pen to remove pigment from the tips of the pencil and then draw directly onto the paper. This is also a good method of adding fine detail into your paintings. I've selected a number of different bright colours which I can apply quite heavily to the surface of the paper. Over this I apply a heavy layer of dark. This is a method of working known as sgraffito. The technique involves scraping back the surface to reveal the underlying layers of colour. So you're effectively drawing with a scalpel. To make this work you need to apply quite heavy layers of pigment so that you can scrape back, and you do need to be quite careful that you don't damage the paper underneath. But it is a very interesting and satisfying way of working, a bit like working on scraper board. Yet another technique is using spatter. Again, this is where the brush pen comes into its own. We don't have to worry about keep dipping it into a glass of water. I'm starting with a yellow and then changing to a blue, which immediately gives us a green. And as we continue using the blue, obviously it gets bluer. Into this wet surface I can then draw. So I'm creating shapes and patterns just by using dry pencils into the wet surface. To create flower heads, I've dipped the stick into water again, so we're getting a lot of pigment going onto the surface. A few quick strokes create stalks and seed heads. Here I'm drawing a window using an impressed line. I can then work over the top of the drawing with pigment, and it doesn't go into the depressions, so it leaves a white outline for the window. You don't have to impress just white paper. You can create impressions onto coloured surfaces as well. This is quite a useful technique for creating all sorts of textures and patterns, such as leaf veins and twigs. This is a dry technique, so I'm gradually building up the image with dry pigment. Whenever you look at windows, they're generally not all black rectangles. You've got tonal variation going on in each pane, because windows are reflecting the light and reflecting what's opposite them. So don't be afraid to add slightly different colours and different ranges of tone in there. The same with the brickwork. I'm trying not to describe every single brick, just an indication of mortar lines and where the lintel runs over the top of the window. You'll often find, if you look at windows, certainly at street level, they appear to be darker at the top than at the bottom. Gradually building up the brickwork now, adding an orange to indicate some of the bricks. Still working completely dry, so we've not added any water yet. Bit of green going on there now. You often see bricks, certainly old bricks, with this greenish tint, and then some violet going in for shadow colour, and to indicate some of the joints in the brick. Now I'm using the electric eraser to lift out the reflections on the panes of glass. And now finally I'm adding water, so some of the pigment is going to lift and float around.
Well, hopefully there you've seen lots of different techniques that you can try yourself on your own paintings at home.